I understand why granola and oatmeal are popular at breakfast time. They're a healthy way to start the day. But what are you trying to do? Live forever? In Scotland, when it comes to breakfast and most things, we take the live fast, die young approach, which is why we like rolls. And when you see what we typically fill them with, you'll have a better understanding of why life expectancy in Glasgow is about 8 years shorter than people who live in, say, Iceland. But come on, would you rather eat this or cod liver oil? We're not talking about just any rolls, by the way. Believe me when I say that these particular rolls are a Scottish institution, a way of life. The debate about soft versus crispy can get pretty heated, but to me there's no contest. Crispy rolls are king. There are only 2 bakeries in Glasgow that make them on an industrial scale every day. They're delivered to cafes, corner shops, gas stations and food trucks all around the city in the early hours of the morning, and by the afternoon they are as rare as hen's teeth.
Nae rolls.
What do you mean, nae rolls?
I mean there's nae rolls today, mate. Nae rolls.
There are a few things that make these rolls so distinctive and basically unlike other bread rolls. A higher amount of water, which maybe counterintuitively gives the crispy crust an airy, bubbly interior. They're cold fermented for longer and baked until they're quite dark, which again provides flavour that you just don't get with anemic store-bought bread. Finally, they're coated in a rough textured rice flour, and that part is really important, but we'll get to that in a bit. The all-purpose flour I'm using has a pretty high protein content. If yours doesn't, then you might want to use bread flour. I then rub shortening into the flour. If you've ever made shortbread in home ec class, you'll be familiar with this technique. Rub the fat into the flour until there are no lumps left. Next, I'm going to dissolve some yeast in cold water along with salt and sugar, pour that mixture into the fat-enriched flour, and I'm just using my hands to bring it all together. This dough has a hydration level of 80%, which is really high, so it's going to be very loose and sticky. Don't freak out, just mix it thoroughly in the bowl and kind of knead it for a couple of minutes. This is going into the fridge to ferment for 12 to 16 hours. This isn't bread that can be made in an hour or two. It really takes time to develop the right flavour. By the way, you'll often hear that salt kills yeast and the two should never be mixed together like I just did. In this case, that's clearly bollocks. This dough is very much alive. Remember that rice flour I mentioned? To make it yourself, just blitz a handful of white rice in a spice grinder or blender until you get this coarse texture. This part is crucial, so don't skip it. Turn the dough onto a lightly floured counter, and then I'm going to divide it into 8 equal pieces, about 120 grams each. Don't worry too much about the shape. Like Glaswegians themselves, these rolls should be quite irregular, and honestly they're too sticky to mess about with anyway. I'm dunking each roll into the rice flour, coating it all over, and then onto a sheet pan lined with a silicone mat. Space them pretty close together because we want them to touch when they bake. Cover them tightly with plastic wrap and then let them double in size. Preheat the oven to 480 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really hot for baking bread, but trust me on this. Spray them with a little water and we're going to bake them for about 25 minutes. I rotate the pan about halfway through to make sure they brown evenly. They have to be baked until they get this really dark brown colour. This is super important, otherwise the flavour won't be right. Sometimes if the colour isn't quite there, I'll leave them in for another 5 minutes or so. When they're piping hot, they're actually still cooking inside, so don't be tempted to snaffle them immediately. Transfer them over to a cooling rack and let them cool completely. They should be crispy on the outside, but fluffy and soft in the middle. Once they're cool, if you're not going to eat them all in the immediate future, I would recommend placing them in a Ziploc and freezing them, because the shelf life is literally maybe half a day before these bad boys turn into something you could assault someone with. If you freeze them, just throw them in the microwave in the lowest setting for a couple of minutes and they'll be pretty much as good as new. Now these are pretty incredible just with some butter, as all good bread should be. Maybe with some hot soup on a frigid winter's day, but in Glasgow, a roll just isn't a roll unless it's filled with something that made us one of the heart attack capitals of the world. The usual suspects are square sausage, black pudding, don't forget the HP sauce, potato scones, regularly shaped sausage, bacon, and my personal favourite, just a fried egg. If you want to be cultured as hell, you could do like tomato and ham And here's an application where I think crispy rolls are vastly underrated, and that's gently cradling a cheeseburger. That is absolute filth.